Well, indeed, we have quite a number of things to look at this morning. But joining us on Sunrise Early this morning is Dr. Muiz Banire, who is a senior advocate of Nigeria. Just last week, we had members of, Amnesty International here, and also an independent senior advocate of Nigeria, talking about the accusations that the Nigeria police is high-handed in its response to the letter written or the report released by Amnesty International. Well, before we go into that particular matter, I would like to just, confirm that Dr. Banire. Good morning, Dr. Banire. Can you hear me?
Good morning. I can hear you clearly. Good morning.
Oh, great. Great to have you join us. Just before we go into the issue of Amnesty International and the Nigeria police, I wanted to quickly get your thoughts on the assumption of office today of President-elect Donald Trump. I mean, of course, he is the former president, so sometimes it can be a bit confusing when you say President Donald Trump and he's about to take another oath of office today. But I wanted to get your own views, if you had any, watching what is happening in the United States and the expectations that you might have as a Nigerian watching the politics of the U.S.
Well, honestly speaking, I must say that I'm in a confused state. I don't know what to say really, what the expectation to be. But I have so much realization about things that are likely to be unfolding, particularly globally. I'm not too bothered about the local issues within the United States because, of course, they've chosen who they prefer. They have to live by it. But globally, I suspect that we might have a lot of unusual scenarios playing out at the end of the day, which might not be too comforting to all of us. That's my suspicion.
Okay, well, we'll wait and see how that eventually plays out. But let me take you to the matter at hand, which is this issue between the police and Amnesty International. A number of civil society organizations have come out to say that the police was targeting and threatening officials of Amnesty International for no just cause, because what it is that they have released in their report is no different from what other, even government institutions have found out. For instance, the National Human Rights Commission has also confirmed that during the August protest last year, there were a number of people killed. Why, do you think the police has reacted in the manner that it has with Amnesty International?
Well, I've been following the event in the last, I think, almost 6 weeks or thereabout now. And I think that what has happened here, well, it's a good development, in my view, in the first instance, because if an agency of government or a person feels strongly about his position, that is, you are convinced of your position, there's nothing wrong in you ventilating your grievance. And I think that's what Nigeria police appears to be doing, to say that we are convinced we haven't committed what they said they have committed. So we believe that there must be some retraction or some form of redress ultimately on this. And to me, it's just something that I would do also. If, for example, you raise an allegation against me and I know I'm innocent of it, of course, I will continue to insist until my case is established. And I think that the scenario playing out in this instance too.
All right, so let's look at some of the issues which the police, which Amnesty International has raised, which is about police brutality, more or less. The fact that they were involved in some of the allegations. How do you think that this should have been handled? Do you think, because the police really cannot investigate itself, it cannot be a judge in its own case, can it?
Well, certainly not. Certainly, I will not expect that to be candid, because I know somebody raised that in one other program that I watched, and the response of the first PRO was simply that it wasn't the police that did the investigation alone, that there were a number of other independent representatives on the panel that went for the investigation, which is fair enough anyway. But I agree with you that you cannot be investigating yourself. But beyond that, I think the way to go about this thing ultimately is that I think Amnesty International needs to now operate by the rule of fair hearing. And then when this allegation or discoveries are made, it's always best to contact the affected agency to verify such information. And I think that if this at the top, probably would be somewhere else today. For example, the police has said in one of the instances where they said there was a grenade thrown at protesters in a filling station. Police has said that since the inception of Nigerian police in Nigeria, the police had never used grenades because they've never even bought a single one before, much less now throwing grenade at protesters. Well, if that ultimately is true, which is verifiable as to whether police are in possession, have ever been in possession, or are still in possession of grenade, then at the end of the day, you discover that that will be a false accusation on its own. So for me, the opportunity to have been given by Amnesty, at least in letting the police respond before their final report, that would be my own approach to it. And that is the approach that I will canvass going forward.
Yeah, but they always maintain that usually before they send these reports, before these reports are published, they always invite those whom they have accused, or whose names are mentioned in this report, to take a look at it. And oftentimes the police attends their briefings. So what precisely do you think could warrant, the kind of response which the police has now put out towards these reports that have been released by Amnesty International?
But there must be a disconnect, because from the police angle, they were not invited, they were not given the privilege of response to the allegations at all. And that made them to now conduct their own independent investigation through a panel of some police people and some other independent people. Well, if that is the modus operandi of Amnesty, of course, that would be okay. But if not, then they will have to improve on it. But the police is insisting that they were not given the opportunity, and most of the allegations raised in the document were things that never occurred or wrongly narrated.
As a result of this, there's also been conversation around a shrinking civic space. We also had Mr. Jibril Okutekpa here on the program, SAN, who also intervened in that particular sphere, who said that it's not that it is just shrinking the civic space, that he believes that the civic space is suffocated. The letter which Amnesty International wrote in response to what the police has released, a letter more or less threatening to sue them, has been signed by not just Amnesty International, but by a number of other civil society organizations, which allege that the intimidation, harassment, and threats, these are the words that they use, against Amnesty International, coming after a recent report of intimidation and harassment of SERAP, which is another CSO, and in the context of the ongoing repression of civic space and attacks against activists, human rights defenders, and journalists, demonstrate an alarming crackdown on civic space and human rights in Nigeria. You are a lawyer yourself. Is it something that is it a sentiment, or will I say, is it something you also share? I don't want to say it's a sentiment you share, because this should go beyond sentiment. This should be represented by hard facts. Is it something you also share? This particular statement, portion of the statement around the shrinking civic space in Nigeria?
Oh, to be candid, I generally we agree with that assertion, generally. But however, what at times is considered to be shrinking civic space is often misconstrued. I give you an example which I've been victim, and a lot of people have been victim, the abuse of social media. The abuse of social media has resulted in a lot of maybe arrest, interrogation, and prosecution. And at times this is seen as part of the oppressive tool of the government. But it's not in all instances that I agree, because some of these assertions, allegations that are made against entities or even personalities are so damaging that if it's not taken up by those people, their own image or reputation is also threatened. So we must continuously balance these equities. So if we look at it from that perspective, then one will conclude safely that it's not so much about the government and the civil rights people, but more or less between the abuse of social media citizen. On that, I think that, in my view, too, the approach taken by the Nigerian police, honestly, I must be commended, because it's a civil way to address the issue. It's not about going to arrest somebody and say we are going to arrest their reporter, we are going to prosecute him for criminal defamation or something like that. But this time around, what they have said is that if you do not retract because we believe we have not done this, we will take you to a civil court and justify our case. If everybody can just imbibe that, then the rule of law will grow. And we all need to promote it if we do not want anarchy in our hands. So for me, I believe that it's not so much about that.
Let me get you correctly. Are you saying that the civic space is shrinking or it's not shrinking? Or that it is shrinking, but it is a cause and effect sort of situation?
The latter situation is my position, that to say that it's not so much shrinking, basically because the government is directly involved. It's shrinking seemingly because some of the activities of some of our colleagues in the human rights community are not ones that are worthy of people of repute. In other words, you don't make allegations against persons, you don't make allegations against entity without having a factual basis or the evidence to substantiate that. And like I said to you, if you look at the trend, in most of these instances that they have referenced, they relate to the application of the Cyber Crimes Act as regards the abuse of social media. And in that way, we must continuously isolate instances where government is involved. For me, I share the position that government must allow the space to continuously widen, because I always see some of this, if it is a criticism of government policy, government program, it's welcome. I support it entirely, because for me, if I were to be the leaders, my position would be to regard such criticism as feedback and address it. Or where you even they perceive that the author of such misinformation is one that had come from a position of weakness, it's your responsibility to enlighten or educate such person, not necessarily to harass, intimidate, or even arrest such person. So to that extent, my position will simply be that, well, but as far as the government is concerned, the space must be allowed, but we must not allow the continuous abuse of social media. It's becoming a threat to people's life, people's reputation all over the place. Like it was said before, I must confess to you, I was one of the people that was against the strict regulation of social media under the last administration. But with time now, with the passage of time, I'm beginning to have a think that certainly we need to, as a matter of urgency, regulate the space, as opposed to the civil space vis-a-vis government and the people.
But Dr. Banire, isn't that a result of government not giving the people enough information or communicating with the citizens significantly? Because if people have all the information that they need at any given point in time, there will be little need, if any at all, for speculations and for falsehood to spread. So if people do not know what's going on, isn't it normal for people to just fill in the blank spaces when they know that government should give them information or communicate with the people, engage with the feedback of the people, and they don't?
Well, I completely agree with you that government owes that duty. I completely agree that they must give duty, they must supply information. Even beyond that, like I said, even if, for example, a citizen misconstrues government policy or government program and says something that does not accord with the government position, I do not even believe the government should harass or intimidate such a citizen. Such a citizen must be educated. That's all. You owe him a duty. It means that it's coming from a position of ignorance, and it's your duty to educate or enlighten him. To say, no, this is not the situation. This is the situation. I give you a very good example. Recently, I read on the social media and all over the place that there was a collapse of the national grid again, and the former presidential candidate of Labour Party, Mr. Peter Obi, made some comments adverse to the incumbent position. But I think second or third day thereafter, he realized that the information given was not really correct as per the collapse, but it was a trip-off. And he apologized and corrected himself. That is how it should be. When citizens have information like you rightly said, they are not likely to start peddling rumor all over the whole place. But when there is a gap or lacuna, that is when they start, of course, like you rightly said, filling the gap on their own, which could be injurious to the government itself or to the leaders.
Now, take that to the police conversation we're having, the meat of the matter we're talking about. Perception is reality, Dr. Banire, and over time, people have a position on the police, and I'm not sure how persuaded people are that there has been any significant difference in time past. So there is more likelihood, you may argue it, that people will believe more what the Amnesty International has said as opposed to the response of the police. How will that be managed? Or how should that be managed?
Well, let me start from the fact that perception is not usually reality in all instances. In fact, in a lot of instances, it discovered that perception is far from reality. So that's number one. Secondly, of course, the Nigerian police certainly have credibility problem, no doubt. And I'm sure that's why they are struggling to get out of that credibility issue. One of the ways, of course, they can go about is that if truly they are convinced of their position, let them continue to ventilate it. Maybe at the end of the day, the Amnesty International, through their own investigative machinery, can also justify their position, or if otherwise, of course, the parties can go to court and ventilate their different positions. But most importantly, I believe that some of these things at times are not product of diligent investigation. I read in the Vanguard, most of the information contained in that report. In fact, I forgot the date of the Vanguard. I already read it in the Vanguard before even Amnesty came up with that report. Virtually on all fours with that. So in such instances, there is this tendency in me particularly to say, oh, maybe they just did cut and paste from Vanguard newspaper without actually investigating properly. But be that as it may, the situation is that if the police now insists that, look, we are sure of our position, do conduct further investigation or review yourself or retract your position, and they are convinced, and Amnesty also equally feel the same way. Of course, let them go and resolve it in the proper forum, which is the court. I'm sure that with time, I'm sure the police is struggling to get out of that reputation that they have had over time. And I think that is what is going on now.
Well, Dr. Banire, some people will still argue with you that as far as they are concerned, the police hasn't changed. So if they perceive that the police hasn't changed, then the police has to prove to them that they haven't changed with hard facts. Now, talking about security, a strategy, over time, I think since 2019, there was this security strategy developed by the Office of the NSA at the time, saying that the focus of our security now is on the people and not just on the state. And of course, when we talk about security within Nigeria, the police is supposedly playing the lead role. Now, again, it speaks to the issues raised by Amnesty International. If we look at it generally, it's just saying that the police should do better and the federal government should do more. What are the gaps that you would suggest that the police should fill as quickly as possible so that we can change the perception that people have about them, reality or not?
To be candid, it will take a long time for the police to change the perception in the people for so many reasons. But let me start from your observation initially about the current position of the police vis-a-vis protest. Well, I'm sure I can say without fear of contradiction that they have improved largely. I'm sure you saw what happened in Lagos State here the last time, and not only the last time, I think in the previous 2 or 3 protests, that police were more or less people escorting the protesters all over the whole place. And that's how it should be. Because the police have a very, very delicate responsibility when there are protests in town. One, they need to protect the protesters on one hand. They must also protect innocent citizens. In some of the situations, you find out that third party will hijack such protests to the detriment of innocent citizens. And the right I have to, for example, engage in protest is the same right that you have to say, I'm not going to be part of a protest. Both parties must be protected, and there is a need for balancing. That's on one hand. On the other hand is the reality that, look, if, for example, the police is expected to use the minimum force in maintaining law and order in such situation, and you find a situation where maybe the life of innocent citizens or the life of even the officers of the police are threatened with substantial force from some hoodlums that have hijacked such peaceful or innocent protests, then there must be reciprocity in such instance. In other words, the police too must react appropriately. Otherwise, it will consume not only innocent citizens, it will equally consume even men of the Nigerian police. For example, you notice during the last MPAC governance protest, when the APC armored carrier was hijacked for I think almost 2 days, and were being driven all over the whole place, and seemingly the police were helpless. I'm sure that if they had not been warned and they haven't moved, as we used to know them when we were in school, they would have, of course, shot so many people before we know it. So for me, I believe that certainly they have an Herculean task in their hand. They have to continuously engage the citizen and also punish appropriately their officers where they go beyond bound, and let the people know and create machinery through which the citizens themselves can say, yes, I complained, and the answer, they responded to my complaint objectively. And I think this is the way to go. But for now, of course, there will remain suspicion on the part of the police, on the part of the people against the police. On the part of the government needs to throw more funding into the Nigerian police because they have a lot to do. For example, I expect them to have more of rubber bullets or canisters at worst during protests, not even live bullets. They must not carry live bullets at all anywhere, as much as possible, except absolutely necessary. If it must be carried, it must be negligible, maybe 2 or 3 officers among in dozens of them in a particular. This is the way to go. Except they have all this equipment, then they are unable to perform their role credibly in a way that we expect them to do without injuring the confidence of the people in the Nigerian police. I think these are fundamental.
Dr. Banire, may I ask you, how do you then see this conflict getting resolved? This conflict between the police and Amnesty International. Do you think the police should invite them to a round table and withdraw the case? Because this letter signed by over 40 CSOs is quite telling, isn't it?
Well, there are so many ways to skin a cat. One of the ways is the one you have proposed. Of course, they can sit down with them, engage them, put forth their own evidence, and the Amnesty International can come forth and put down forth their own evidence. And of course, if the police still feel strongly outside such conversation, the appropriate place is for those parties to interrogate it before an arbiter who will look at it independently and apportion blame appropriately. It's not, because we have to be a bit careful in the way and manner that we encourage some undermining of the government itself, because at the end of the day, the consequence will be that we will be in a state of anarchy. Some people that lost their investment or their life during the various protests as a result of the activities of the hoodlum today certainly will be on the side of the police, or in fact, we even condemn the police for not doing enough. That's the irony of it. So it requires some sort of balance. So I believe that they can continue to engage them, or Amnesty International too can engage the Nigerian police, whichever way. The conversation must continue. But if any party that feels offended can ultimately, of course, approach as they have said, they can take a legal redress. Any of the parties can take legal redress. That is it.
Well, we have to thank you for your time. Excuse me, we have time with us this morning on Sunrise Daily. Thank you so much, Dr. Muiz Banire. We certainly will look for how this matter is eventually resolved, but thank you so much for speaking with us. Dr. Muiz Banire is the Senior Advocate of Nigeria.
Welcome.
We'll take a break at this point and we'll be back shortly. Please stay tuned.